Good evening. If you are like you've been looking forward to this April AGO program as a highlight of our program year. John Brock, retired professor of organ at the University of Tennessee, will be presenting a program attractively titled Chorale Preludes 101. This comes out of an undertaking he originally took up with Quentin Faulkner, in which the two of them were going to be writing a book called 101 Chorale Preludes, German organ performance practices of the 17th and 18th centuries. This book is going to be published by Wayne Leopold, and we think will be available in July, certainly by midsummer. John was scheduled to give this lecture at the National Convention of the AGO in Atlanta, and of course that conference had to be canceled due to the pandemic. It was natural for the program committee to offer him a slot in the program year this year because he, of course, is a nationally known exponent of this repertoire, and also it gave us an opportunity locally to pick up on what would have been available only to people who were conventioneering in Atlanta last summer. So John is presenting this evening at Westminster Presbyterian. You will hear some verbal recommendations about performance practice and also demonstrations from the repertoire from the North, Central, and South Germany.
About 2.5 years ago, I was invited by music publisher Wayne Leopold to assume the editorship of a collection of German Baroque chorale preludes that he was planning to publish. Work on this volume had been started by Quentin Faulkner, professor emeritus from the University of Nebraska, who was unfortunately finding it necessary to discontinue his work because of health problems. So I agreed to take up this challenge, and I've been up to my ears in chorale preludes ever since. The book is entitled 101 Chorale Preludes, German Organ Music and Organ Performance Practices of the 17th and 18th Centuries. It's both a collection of chorale preludes and a method book that introduces the organist or organ student to elements of musical style and keyboard technique associated with the works that are included. As a result, the book has an extensive preface of about 50 pages covering topics like articulation, touch, fingering, pedaling, ornamentation, organs, and registration as they applied to 17th and 18th century German organ music. My job has been to finalize the contents of the volume, some of which was selected by Quentin, to supply fingering and pedaling for the pieces, and to compile the preface. Original plans were to publish the book a year ago in the summer of 2020, but because of the pandemic, that goal was extended, and we now expect that the volume will be printed in the summer of this year, 2021. In this program, I would like to give you a little taste of the contents of 101 chorale preludes by focusing on some of the different types of chorale preludes. In English, we are in the habit of using that term, chorale prelude, to refer to almost any composition based on a traditional Lutheran chorale melody, but as you're probably aware, there are several types of pieces based on chorales in which the chorale melodies are treated in different ways. There are also differences in pieces that come from different geographical areas of Germany. As organists, we typically think of Germany during the Baroque era as having been divided into three parts, North, Central, and South. Although South Germany is treated briefly, most of the collection focuses on North and Central Germany, which were the traditional Protestant, that is Lutheran areas of Germany. In contrast to the Catholic South, where the Lutheran chorales were not in regular use. Since playing a chorale prelude intelligently involves knowing the chorale melody and how it has been treated and what the text of the chorale is about, we include the original unornamented chorale tune, what we would call the Cantus Firmus, with a stanza of German text and an English prose translation of it alongside each chorale prelude. So here is an example of a page that shows the chorale tune at the top and the text in German and English prose, and then the chorale prelude. In addition, all of the pieces have been fingered and pedaled in a style based on fingerings that have survived from J.S. Bach and his circle. I should mention that works of Bach have not been included in the collection, but the information in the preface is definitely applicable to the performance of his music. I would like to begin with what I call cantus firmus chorales. In this kind of piece, the unornamented chorale melody is presented in relatively long notes, usually in the soprano or in the bass, but sometimes in an inner voice, as we will see also. The other voices are often based on motives from the cantus firmus. The first piece that we will hear is Praise to the Lord the Almighty, the King of Creation, by Johann Philipp Kirnberger, who was one of Bach's students. Like many Central German pieces, it's a relatively brief setting of the chorale for manuals only in a three-voice texture. This will be followed by a setting of From Heaven Above to Earth I Come, Martin Luther's Christmas hymn by Johann Bernhard Bach, which is in a trio texture with the chorale melody in the tenor played by the left hand. Johann Bernhard was a cousin of Johann Sebastian and was organist in Erfurt and in Eisenach, which is the town where Johann Sebastian was born. These two pieces have not been widely available, and they make nice additions to the repertoire, especially so since these chorales appear in many modern hymnals. This group of pieces will conclude with a setting of Nun freut euch, lieben Christengemein, Rejoice Together, Beloved Christians, by the North German composer Matthias Weckmann. The chorale tune is in the bass, played by the pedal, and the piece seems to be well suited to a big plenum registration. This is a good example of the sturdy, no-nonsense 17th century North German style. Weckmann was organist at St. Jacobi Church in Hamburg. A little curiosity that you may notice in this piece is that the cantus firmus begins in the upper octave of the pedal board, but in the middle of the piece it switches to the lower octave of the pedal board. As if Weckmann had continued with playing in the upper range of the pedal board, he would have run out of keys. So here are Praise to the Lord by Kirnberger, From Heaven Above by Johann Bernhard Bach, and Rejoice Together, Beloved Christians by Matthias Weckmann. We will now turn to ornamented melody chorales. In an ornamented melody chorale, the cantus firmus is embellished with figuration and ornaments and transformed into an ornate solo melodic line. This solo melody was usually played by the right hand on the root positive, the part of the organ behind the organist and closest to the listeners. The accompaniment was played on another manual and pedal. There are typically short interludes between phrases of the solo line, and these are usually based on fragments of the upcoming chorale phrase. The ornamented melody chorale is the most common type of North German chorale-based piece, especially in the works of Buxtehude. Buxtehude's setting of the Advent chorale, Nun komm der Heiden Heiland, Come Now Savior of the Gentiles, is a good example of this kind of piece. You'll notice that the piece begins with the first phrase directly, but that there are the usual short interludes between phrases of the melody. And at the end, we hear another frequent feature of North German ornamented chorale preludes, a short cadenza or flourish that extends the final phrase for a couple of measures. Before I play the Buxtehude piece, I'll play just the cantus firmus, and then I'll play Buxtehude's ornamented version of it against the cantus firmus so you see how it's been ornamented. The Buxtehude piece will be followed by a short setting of the chorale Jesu wollst uns weisen, Jesus, will you show us how to praise your deeds, by Heinrich Scheidemann, who was one of the leading organists in northern Germany in the first half of the 17th century. After studying with the famous teacher Jan Pieterszoon Zwelik in Amsterdam, Scheidemann returned to Hamburg to become organist of St. Catherine's, one of the city's most important churches. This work is not an ornamented melody piece in the sense of what I described earlier. It's a single manual piece in a clearly homophonic texture, but the chorale melody is in the soprano and is decorated with various kinds of keyboard figuration. This style and textures suggest harpsichord music, but the piece is very effective on the organ, especially on regal-type reeds or flutes. This chorale seems to me to be more a devotional song than a part of the body of standard hymnody from the Orthodox Lutheran tradition. So here are Buxtehude's Nun komm der Heiden Heiland and Scheidemann's Jesu wollst uns weisen. are less common in the Central German repertoire, although they do exist, and there are some examples included in 101 chorale preludes. Next, let's take a look at chorale fuggettas. A fugetta is a short fugue, and in a chorale fugetta, the first phrase of the chorale serves as the fugue subject. Other phrases of the chorale usually never appear. The chorale fugetta seems to have been intended as an introduction to the singing of the chorale, and it's almost exclusively a Central German genre. Johann Krieger's fugetta on the Lord's Prayer chorale, Vater unser im Himmelreich, Our Father in Heaven, is a good example. A short piece like this can be extended by following it with one or more harmonized versions of the chorale melody, which is a good way to put your melody harmonization skills to use. That is essentially what Pachelbel does in the piece that will follow. We often find that composers combine two or more compositional techniques into one piece. This occurs in Pachelbel's setting of Aus tiefer Not schrei ich zu dir, From Deep Distress I Cry to You, which begins as a chorale fugetta, but then evolves into a cantus firmus type chorale, a setting of the entire chorale melody in long notes. Like many other Central German works, this is a piece without pedal, with a somewhat busy four-voice texture. Pachelbel was, of course, a very prolific composer of chorale preludes, and there are 10 of his compositions in 101 chorale preludes. This composition demonstrates his characteristic use of relatively simple harmonies and very elegant polyphony, and the vocal nature of the polyphony seems well suited to the singing 8-foot principal stop. There are two melodies associated with the text Aus tiefer Not. This one is a major key melody that is probably less well known than the one in the Phrygian mode that we know, for example, from Bach's works. So here are a short chorale fugetta by Johann Krieger and a more substantial fugetta and chorale harmonization by Johann Pachelbel. The next category of chorale preludes that we will explore is the bicinium. Bicinium is a fancy word for a two-voice piece with one voice for each hand. Samuel Scheidt's Bicinium on Warum betrübst du dich, mein Herz? Why are you grieving, my heart? Makes use of the compositional technique called invertible counterpoint or double counterpoint. With this technique, each phrase of the chorale is stated twice, the second statement being an inversion of the first, in which the bass becomes the soprano and the soprano becomes the bass. You'll hear the longer notes of the chorale melody and the more active accompaniment voice alternating between the hands. Like Heinrich Scheidemann, Samuel Scheidt was a student of Sweelinck in Amsterdam, and his music is very similar in style to that of his teacher. Georg Philipp Telemann's Bicinium on Christ lag in Todesbanden, Christ lay in the bonds of death, represents a simpler approach to the two-voice writing that was more typical of Central German composers. This kind of piece has no invertible counterpoint. The right hand simply plays the unornamented chorale melody over the left hand's very active accompaniment voice. The left hand typically has scale-wise or arpeggiated figures, or, as we will hear in this piece, leaping figures. Telemann is not especially remembered as an organist, although early in his career he held a couple of organist positions. He was a very skillful and prolific composer and devoted most of his compositional energy to writing operas, sacred vocal music, and chamber music. He did leave behind 48 chorale preludes, some of which are quite refreshing, and there are 4 of them in 101 chorale preludes. So now we hear 2 contrasting bicinia, the pieces by Scheidt and Telemann. Our final group of chorale settings is devoted to chorale partitas. A chorale partita is a set of variations on a chorale melody. Partitas sometimes begin with a simple statement of the chorale, although not always, followed by variations that may be like short chorale preludes or movements in which the chorale melody may be more implied than actually stated. Georg Böhm's partita on the chorale, Freudig sehr o meine Seele, which we also know as the hymn tune Psalm 42, Comfort, Comfort Now My People, consists of 12 variations, of which 2 are included in 101 chorale preludes. Böhm's works, including this partita, are notable for his extensive use of French ornamentation, which we also find in the works of Johann Gottfried Walter. The partita by Walter on Jesu meine Freude, Jesus my joy, or Jesus priceless treasure, consists of a chorale and 10 variations, and because it's one of the best examples of this genre, we decided to include it in its entirety so that there would be at least one complete chorale partita in the collection. With the exception of J.S. Bach, Johann Gottfried Walter was the most exceptional and most prolific Baroque composer of chorale preludes. I'm sure that most of you play some pieces by Walter, since much of his output is quite accessible and many pieces are truly gems. 101 chorale preludes includes 24 pieces by Walter, more than any other composer. So I will conclude the program with 2 variations on Freudig sehr by Georg Böhm and the chorale and 3 variations from Walter's partita on Jesu meine Freude. I hope you have enjoyed this program. If you have questions about the book or about anything I've said or neglected to say, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Just email me and I'll reply. My email address is jbrock@utk.edu. It's on the printed program that you can download, and it's in the Knoxville AGO chapter yearbook. I can also send you a list of the registrations that were used in the program. The registrations were initially going to be a part of the program itself, but it turned out to take too much time to do that. So I do have a list of the registrations that I can mail out. The email, once again, is jbrock@utk.edu. I'd like to thank Peter Van Eenem and the people of Westminster Presbyterian Church for their generosity in making the church and the Richards Falks organ here available for this program. And I'd like to thank Peter and Jason overall for making the recording. And thank you for listening.